Did you ever wonder what would have happened if Luffy was trained by some of One Piece's worst villains? How strong would he become, and most importantly, would he end up turning evil? For example, if Luffy was trained by 𝐕𝐲𝐴, a lot of crazy things would happen. For starters, I'll assume that Luffy somehow ended up in 𝐕𝐲𝐴's care at a young age, before he ever got his devil fruit powers. Growing up as a part of the Don Quixote family would be a completely different experience for Luffy. Instead of the peaceful Fuchsia village, Luffy would be surrounded by the chaos and violence of 𝐕𝐲𝐴's operations, learning the cruel ways of the underworld from an early age. Being part of the family also means Luffy would be exposed to multiple unique fighting styles, just like Law was. So instead of fighting with bare hands, this version of Luffy would be able to use swords, guns, and even some martial arts. Considering he and Law are roughly the same age, I believe the two of them would become very good friends. Growing up in this kind of environment, Luffy would be much more serious than he was in the main story. However, considering that many people on 𝐕𝐲𝐴's crew are, well, idiots, Luffy would probably retain some of his goofiness. In terms of devil fruit, Luffy definitely wouldn't have the gum fruit, but that doesn't mean that 𝐕𝐲𝐴 wouldn't give him some other powerful fruit their crew finds. Remember, the guy is literally the king of the underworld, so obtaining a powerful fruit for Luffy wouldn't be a problem. Another thing that would be different in this scenario is that Luffy would learn Haki from a young age, which would make him incredibly strong early on. But let's now answer the most important question. Would this version of Luffy grow up to be an evil tyrant like 𝐕𝐲𝐴? Well, probably not. Let me explain. You see, in the main story, Law spent a long time with the Don Quixote family, and he never became a bad guy. Sure, he isn't the friendliest pirate around, but overall tries to always do the right thing. That's why I think Luffy would grow up to be the same way. Before we continue any further, I want to tell you guys about Girls Frontline 2 𝐥𝐵𝐿ium, the sponsor of today's video. In it, you take the role of the commander and lead a group of tactical dolls through contaminated zones while battling enemies. It's a new turn-based strategy RPG, and the gameplay is really addicting, as you have to think and figure out how to approach every situation. But this game is not just fighting, as you can also interact with your dolls in between battles, change their outfits, listen to their voice lines, and learn their story. A huge new patch for the game just released, and with it came a new elite doll, Lukai. And with her, you don't have to worry about failing battles, because I mean, look at her. No enemies are gonna have the heart to fight her. With this new version, there's also a limited time event called 𝐿𝐴𝐿ium, and by participating in it, you'll get some cool rewards like 10 access permissions, 30 targeted access permissions, and even Lukai new outfit, Speedstar, for absolutely free. There are also a few new game mods like Boundary Push, and even a new event, Assault Simulation, where you have to manually aim and shoot at enemies. What are you waiting for? Click my link in the description or scan my QR code to download Girls Frontline 2 𝐥𝐵𝐿ium now and start your adventure today. However, there's another important thing we need to discuss about this scenario. What would happen when Law and Corazon leave the crew? Would Luffy go with them? Considering Luffy and Law would be best friends at this point, he would most likely know about their plan to leave the crew and go search for medicine for Law. At first, Corazon wouldn't allow him to come because it's too dangerous, but after Luffy threatens to tell 𝐕𝐲𝐴 that Corazon isn't mute, he would be forced to let him come along. The three of them would set sail together, and this part of the story would go pretty much the same, with them being unable to find a cure and learning about 𝐵𝐵𝐴𝐵𝐴 Nomi. Just like in the original, Corazon would steal the fruit and give it to Law before dying. After this traumatic experience, neither Law nor Luffy would want to go back to 𝐕𝐲𝐴's crew and would most likely stick together. They would soon make their way to Swallow Island, where they would recruit Sachi, Penguin, and Beppo to start their own pirate crew. They would name it the Heart Pirates as an homage to Corazon, and would both be active captains, similar to how Dory and Broggy were on their crew. For the next couple years, they will sail around the Grand Line, slowly building their crew and getting stronger. Which leads us to the question, how strong will this Luffy actually be? Well, due to all the training he got when he was a Don Quixote pirate, and the fact that he has been a pirate for years already, it's safe to say that this version of Luffy would be far stronger than the original one at this point in the story. Also, training Haki from an early age would make his and Law's journey so much easier, and they would eventually reach the New World. However, this is where their luck will run out. You see, although Luffy's strength is impressive, he is simply not ready to enter the New World. In the main story, Rayleigh, who is one of the strongest Haki users in existence, trained Luffy for 2 full years, and even then, there were many people in the New World he couldn't defeat. Now, this version of Luffy is much smarter than the real one, so he wouldn't try picking fights with Emperors of the Sea, but even if he didn't, it would only take one relatively strong New World crew to beat him. Another disadvantage for Luffy in this scenario is that he doesn't have his original crew. Think about it. Besides him and Law, there are no strong fighters on the ship, unless you count Beppo or Penguin. This is why I believe that in this version of the story, Luffy's journey would come to an abrupt end soon after entering the New World, and he would be defeated either by the Marines or strong pirates. Okay, Luffy didn't get far in this scenario, but would being raised by Kaido, the strongest creature in the world, be any different? First of all, let me tell you that this scenario would be absolutely insane because Kaido's parenting style is, well, interesting. Just look at how he treated Yamato. Now, I know Luffy isn't his real son, but I still believe he would be extremely harsh towards him. Kaido and the Beast Pirates would teach Luffy Haki at a very young age. Then, he would be forced to spar against strong Beast Pirate members in order to perfect his skills and strengthen his body. Although this might seem like a lot for a kid to handle, you have to remember that in the original story, Luffy survived Garp's training, so I think he can handle this as well. This brutal training would lead to Luffy becoming way stronger than he was in the main story. But that's not all, because Kaido would also give the boy a devil fruit. But which one? Well, most of the Beast Pirates have Smile devil fruits, and those aren't really all that great. However, since Luffy has proved to be strong, I believe that Kaido would agree to give him an ancient Zoan devil fruit instead, in order to fit in with the rest of the top officers. This devil fruit, combined with his natural talent, would make him a perfect beast pirate, and I believe he would quickly earn his place as one of the Flying Six. Once Luffy awakens his Conqueror's Haki, Kaido would be even more impressed with him, and would probably start training him personally so he can achieve his full potential. This means that Luffy and Yamato would practically be rivals in this timeline, both trying to impress Kaido. However, the two would drift apart once Yamato starts admiring Oden. After Kaido imprisons Yamato, I believe he would regard Luffy as his new son, and would start taking him on missions to gain more experience. Okay, Luffy's strength would obviously be off the charts in this scenario, but what about his personality? He would surely still be a good guy, right? Well, I don't think so. Being raised on Wano by Kaido and the Beast Pirates, and witnessing so many cruel things at a young age would completely change Luffy. In the previous scenario, when he was raised by Doflamingo, he at least had Law and Corazon on his side, which helped him stay his usual self. However, in the Beast Pirates, there isn't a single good person, which would lead to Luffy becoming way more ruthless. After a couple of years, Ace would eventually arrive on Wano, and this time, Luffy would be the one who finds him. Since they wouldn't know each other in this timeline, they would instantly clash in an epic duel. So who would win? Well, since Ace is a Logia, I don't believe he would easily lose. So it's more likely that he would simply retreat after seeing how strong Luffy is. By this point in the story, Luffy's name would slowly start making its way around the New World as one of Kaido's strongest men. Being on Kaido's crew would also significantly boost his bounty, and by the time he's around 17, it would likely be around 1 billion berries. Since Luffy is obsessed with being the strongest in this timeline, I believe that after some time passes, he would challenge Jack to a duel so he can take his position as one of the All-Stars. With his insane Conqueror's Haki, Luffy would easily win and replace him, which means that he would get his own ship and mini crew to take on missions. His first mission would be to go to Zou in order to find Raizo. Considering Straw Hats aren't coming to Mink's rescue in this version of the story, I think it's safe to assume that Luffy would easily defeat Inuarashi and Nekomamushi on his own. While there, he might also notice a road poneglyph and inform Kaido about it. This would excite Kaido because it would mean that he now has a big advantage in becoming the Pirate King compared to the other emperors. So he would start preparing his men for an all-out war on Big Mom pirates to secure the third road poneglyph and also Pudding, who would be the only person capable of reading them in this version of the story. story because Robin would have died on Alabasta. A massive war between two emperor crews would soon start, and Luffy would play a major role in it, most likely defeating some of Big Mom's top officers like Katakuri or Smoothie. Afterward, he would continue his life as a beast pirate and would help Kaido wreak havoc across the world. Okay, evil Luffy is definitely not something I expected to ever see, but would he still turn out evil if he was raised by Big Mom instead? Well, first of all, if Luffy somehow ended up being raised by Big Mom, we can assume that she would treat him the same way she treats her other children. She would even officially name him Charlotte Luffy to fit in with the rest of the family. Growing up on a whole cake island would be an absolute paradise for Luffy, as he would have so much different food to eat. Of course, he would definitely deserve his meals by always being the strongest among his peers. Same as with the other scenarios we covered, it's likely that Luffy would learn hockey from a young age and become much stronger than he was at the start of the original story. Another great thing for Luffy in this scenario is that he would have a bunch of different people to train with because Big Mom's crew has so many fighters who use completely different styles. This would help make Luffy a really adaptable fighter who would be prepared for any situation. Also, let's not forget that Katakuri is a master of observation hockey, which is something he could teach Luffy in order to make him even stronger. After a couple of years, Luffy would be given a food-based devil fruit, just like everyone else on Big Mom's crew. And it would most likely be a fruit related to meat in some way, which would fit his personality the best. After getting a devil fruit, this version of Luffy would also become one of Big Mom's ministers, which pretty much means that he would get to rule over one of her islands. However, living under Big Mom wouldn't always be this great, as she has her fair share of problems, with the biggest one being her hunger pangs. In this state, she can destroy whole islands, and since Luffy would be one of the most competent people on the crew, he would be tasked with calming her down, which isn't an easy task. So, do you remember how Luffy became more ruthless in the last scenario because he was only surrounded by evil characters? Well, surprisingly enough, that wouldn't happen this time around. You see, although Big Mom's crew is kinda evil, there are a bunch of good people on it too, like Peckham's, Chiffon, and maybe even Pudding. This is why I believe that Luffy would still retain his usual personality, being kind-hearted, but also willing to do some questionable things if Big Mom asks. But as he grows up and becomes more mature, he would eventually start to realize that his crew does some really messed up things. Firstly, over the years, Luffy would witness the destruction of many islands that couldn't produce enough candy for Big Mom, as well as Big Mom punishing people by taking their lifespan. However, the thing that would completely set him off and make him rethink his loyalty to Big Mom is when she tries to force him into an arranged marriage. This would infuriate Luffy, and knowing that Big Mom can't be reasoned with, he would decide that his only option is to leave. He would discuss this idea with a couple of his friends from the crew, who are also unhappy with how Big Mom is treating them, but none of them would be brave enough to escape, which means that he would be on his own. From here, he would wait until Big Mom and most of the strongest members are away, and would make his escape on a small boat in order to not get noticed. Although he wouldn't be a part of Big Mom's crew anymore, Luffy would still have a great desire to explore the world and find the One Piece, so I think it's most likely that he would start his own crew. In a really short time, Luffy would become one of the few pirates to get a billion berry bounty, but this would come with one huge problem. Due to his popularity, it wouldn't be hard for Big Mom to find him and attempt to capture him. Luffy would easily deal with weaker members of her crew and might even defeat one of the Sweet Commanders, but as soon as Big Mom herself joins the battle, his luck would run out. You see, even though Luffy is incredibly strong in this version of the story, without his Nika powers, he would stand no chance against an Emperor of the Sea. He might manage to land a few punches on her, but after some time, he would be defeated and captured. Luffy would watch as Big Mom takes all of his crew's lifespan, but instead of doing the same to him, she would use him as an example of what happens to those who go against her. And so, Luffy's fate would be to sit in Big Mom's book prison for the rest of his life, with no chance of escaping. Man, who would have guessed that this scenario would end so tragically? But now, it's time for the part of the video you've all been waiting for. What would have happened if Luffy was raised by his worst enemy, Blackbeard? Before we start with this segment, it's important to mention that Blackbeard didn't really have his own crew while Luffy was a kid. So for this scenario, I'll assume that Luffy is already about 17 when he joins Blackbeard, which is the age he was at the start of the main story. This means that Luffy would also eat his devil fruit before joining Blackbeard, which would make this the only scenario where he has his original fruit. Now, Now, since Blackbeard knows everything about devil fruits, he would instantly realize that Gum Gum fruit doesn't exist, and would be somewhat skeptical of Luffy and his real powers. In order to achieve all of his crazy plans, Blackbeard would need Luffy to get stronger ASAP, so he would start training him every day. Besides regular hockey and devil fruit training, Blackbeard would also teach Luffy to play dirty and always try to trick his opponents. Considering Blackbeard understands devil fruits more than pretty much anyone in the story, I believe that in this scenario, Luffy would develop his gears 2 through 4 much quicker. While training, Blackbeard would constantly ask Luffy about his devil fruit, questions like where he got it from and what it looked like. Piecing all of this information together, Blackbeard would realize that Luffy actually ate the legendary Nika fruit, but would keep this information for himself for the time being. Soon enough, Ace would track Blackbeard's crew to 𝗕𝗏𝗄 Island, where they would be forced to face him. Although Luffy would never willingly attack his brother, in order for this scenario to work, I need to assume that Luffy would be more evil in this version of the story and would do anything Blackbeard tells him. So, in order to prove his loyalty, Blackbeard would order him to attack Ace. Taking a veteran pirate like Ace down wouldn't be an easy task. However, I still believe Luffy would be strong enough to injure him enough so the rest of the crew can finish him off. Anyways, the Blackbeard pirates' next destination would be Impel Down. Breaking in would be a bit tougher this time around, considering there wouldn't be an active riot going on, but with Luffy there to help, things would go basically the same, with Blackbeard recruiting some prisoners to his crew. From there, nothing too significant would change in the story until after the Summit War, when Blackbeard would task Luffy with hunting down people with powerful devil fruits and bringing them to him. Luffy would do exactly as he was told and would hunt other pirates, marines, and even common people. During the next 2 years, these actions would quickly skyrocket his bounty to over 1 billion berries. In those 2 years, he would also become much stronger by learning advanced forms of hockey and fighting increasingly stronger pirates. However, now the biggest challenge so far awaits Luffy. You see, during one of Luffy's regroups with Blackbeard pirates on Hachinosu, the entire island would suddenly get attacked by Garp and Sword. Is Luffy really ready to face this threat? Well, he would definitely try and attack Garp head on while his crewmates deal with everyone else. As expected, Garp would overwhelm Luffy at first, easily tanking his punches and heavily injuring him using armament hockey. But the tide of the battle would instantly change once Luffy awakens Gear 5. After a long and exhausting battle, Luffy would finally defeat Garp the hero and show the world just how strong he really is. And although at this point Luffy would feel invincible, something tragic would soon happen that would instantly stop his journey. You didn't think Blackbeard was just training Luffy from the goodness of his heart, right? Of course not. After Luffy defeats Garp and awakens his devil fruit, Blackbeard would finally put his plan into motion. He would invite Luffy to his room to talk. But as soon as Luffy enters, he would be knocked out by other Titanic captains. Blackbeard would then cover Luffy with a cloth and steal his devil fruit, killing him in the process. This was Blackbeard's plan all along, and now that he has 3 strongest devil fruits in existence within him, he would be literally unstoppable, and finding the One Piece would only be a matter of time. But if you want to know what would have happened if Luffy was trained by good guys instead, click on this video next to find out. Go on, click it.